My name is Sharia, and for a living, I turn workplaces into growth spaces. This podcast is a front row seat into my own personal and professional development as I talk with inspiring people about the growth that takes place at the intersection of work and life. Welcome to Grow There with Sharia. I've never really been a big fan of networking. I don't know, maybe it's just the word itself. I've just never really loved it. But what I do love is when someone says, "Hey, I think there's someone you should meet," or "Hey, I have someone in my network who I'd love to introduce you to." That is so fun to me because it just feels like we get to meet with intention and we get to have a really great conversation, even when we're entering into a Zoom room and we have no idea why we're meeting. I don't know, it feels great. I love it because I think what I've found is that maybe I don't like, quote, networking. That feels a little transactional to me. But what I do love is making friends and making true connections. And if you know me, I like to make true connections. I don't really want surface level anything. And today's guest is someone who is one of those people who came into my life because my friend Britt Barron said, "Hey, I think you should meet Rha Goddess." And when I met her, I just thought, I know exactly why Britt said we should meet. So Ra's going to be on the podcast today, and I can't wait for you to meet her. Rha is known as an entrepreneurial soul coach. And when you listen to her talk, you'll know exactly why that's the that's the perfect phrasing for her. She's helped thousands of purpose-driven leaders to give voice to their visions and develop the strategies to make them real. From multiple New York Times bestsellers to multi-million dollar social enterprises, she's helped launch a whole new generation of cultural visionaries and social entrepreneurs dedicated to staying true, getting paid, and doing good, which is the tagline of her book, The Calling. However, I'm so excited to announce that she also has her new book, which is dropping May 6th, and it's called Intentional Ambition: Redefining Your Work for Greater Joy, Freedom, and Fulfillment. And you can pre order that today. And I guarantee you, you're going to want to pre order it after you hear her talk today and share her story today. She is one of a kind. She is a beautiful soul, a beautiful soul. And she's also beautiful inside and out. And I can't wait for you to meet her. So without further ado, it's time to grow there with Rha Goddess. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Grow There with Sharia. I am so excited to have Rha Goddess here with us today. Hi, Rha. How are you?
I'm great, Cheria. How are you?
I'm so good. And I feel like this is such a treat. I feel like when we first met, it was like there was just a spark. And felt so just I felt so blessed to just sit with your wisdom and to hear your not just your wisdom, but your authenticity just pour out of you so naturally. And I was immediately inspired. So I'm so happy to be sitting with you today and hearing from you and sharing you with my world. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. My joy, and I could say same, same.
Well, you know why we're here. We're here to hear stories and tell stories about time in our life when work and life intersected and we grew from that. So I'd love to just give you the floor to share with me your story.
Yeah, I'll start by saying I'm in such a profound place around renegotiating and navigating my relationship with work. And I feel like it happens almost every day.
Yeah.
Um, and really, the impetus for this era of renegotiation began with the death of my father.
Mhm.
And I'll just tell you a little bit about I describe myself as a change of life baby born into the intersection of civil rights and hip hop.
Mm.
So my parents had me in their 40s. They were born
Wow.
in the 1920s.
Wow.
And for me, it has been a gift in that I've had the privilege of having a first person narrative of what it was to live through 2 decades of Jim Crow segregation, to live through the civil rights movement, to have done all the things that my parents had done, and that was so much part of my formative years, and just the values that they instilled in me as a result of what their own personal and collective journeys had been in growing up in my mom in the South
Mm.
during that time, and then them meeting and falling in love in New York in the 1950s, so
Wow.
it's like all this real,
Wow.
you know what I mean, like history, and being on the front lines of so much of what has been history making,
Yeah.
um, and my mother, sadly passed away when I was 26.
Mm.
Which then sort of caused my sister and I to really become the primary caretakers for my father,
Yeah.
who was really devastated. My mom died very suddenly, very unexpectedly,
Mm.
and there was so much to navigate coming out of her death, but it then brought my sister and I into what was a 21-year collaborative partnership
Mm.
in caring for my dad.
Mm.
And at the time that my dad became really ill, he was in his 80s, and it was one of those things where, it always begins with, like, a fall, something
Yeah.
that you think is kind of innocuous that then leads to a whole series of complications, which was certainly the case in his case, and a lot of navigating of our very challenged healthcare system, and that could be its own book, truly.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure could.
But, his, sunsetting of life paralleled with the growth and explosion of my company.
Mm.
And my way of both coping with what I knew was nearing the end of his life and this sort of on paper perceived success was to just throw myself into work,
Mm.
and he passed at the end of 2016. And I just full throttled it into my business
Mhm.
to not really fully deal with my grief. I was a
Mm.
daddy's girl, no question about it. He was my hero in every sense of the word. And I did not give myself room and space. I did what I felt at that time came naturally to me, which was to just throw myself into work and allow work to be the distraction. And at about the end of summer of 2017, I collapsed.
Mm.
I could not get off the couch. I mean, it just kind of all, and there was a lot of things going on in the company, and there were dynamics with the team, and this was sort of right on the heels of Charlottesville. I don't know if you
Mm.
remember the
Yeah.
uprising, particularly around the Robert E. Lee statue,
Yeah.
and all of those dynamics that were all bubbling to the surface,
Mhm.
uh, with the onslaught of a brand new president. And
Mm.
interesting, we're in this
Yeah.
cycle again,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Everything I had ever been taught, everything I had ever absorbed about work and working,
Mm.
and why I was working and what it was all for really came to a head.
Yeah.
And I finally admitted in the fall of 2017 that I was not okay.
Mm.
That there was no part of me left that could just trudge on. And that was the beginning of a really painful, but also very beautiful unraveling
Mm.
of my relationship to myself, my relationship to my work, and my relationship to the way that I work.
Mm. Yeah. How First of all, I am so sorry for the loss, all of the loss from your mom to your dad, and I think grief is such a teacher, and it's a teacher we don't want. We really it's one of those teachers we're not interested in, but it is such a teacher, and you speak about this so beautifully and eloquently, and you honor it even in just the way that you talk about the beginning of this. So, I'm curious, can you tell me I loved in the beginning how you talked about the renegotiation with work and your relationship to work, but talk to me about that journey from kind of collapse to where you are now and how you let grief be your teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I I don't know that I had ever put together trauma and high performance until I remember listening to a conversation with Erica Chidi Cohen,
Mm,
who talked about particularly Black women and this idea of hyper productivity
mhm.
and trauma and the way that it was connected to slavery, right?
Yeah,
And, I am deeply familiar with Dr. Joy DeCree's work on post traumatic slave syndrome. And no matter what your background is, if you're listening to this, I highly recommend it because I think that there are corollary relationships with immigrant communities who've come to this country,
sure.
right? And many other lineages through which the foundations have been built on overcoming extreme hardship.
Mm. Mhm.
And I talk a lot about this in my work now and in a new book that's coming. But I did not realize at the time all of what was hooked into or connected to my work ethic
Mm,
until it began to unravel on me.
yes.
Um, and discovering, everything from the way that I was indoctrinated through the example of my parents growing up. My father was an extremely hard worker.
Mhm.
He worked for legal aid
Mm,
in the 1970s and,
wow.
representing cases for $12 a day.
Wow.
If you can imagine, he was a litigator, which was all a rarity anyway, right? If you think about
Yes.
sort of the nature of our
Yeah.
profession and where we were. But I just remember him just this unwavering way that he just, from sun up to sundown, worked.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that combined with the legacy of his experience and how much he would share with my siblings and I about what it was to suffer the indignities of Jim Crow in the
Mm,
day in and day out. And I think there were ways in which I just took a lot of that on my shoulders. My family
mm,
legacy, making my father proud. And again, these are human things, right? Because I don't
sure.
feel like this is just reserved necessarily to my story, but I can think of many of the people who I have the privilege to know, love, and work with, no matter what their backgrounds, where they have a story of making somebody in their family proud or somebody
Yeah.
who sacrificed to give them an opportunity, whether it was putting them through school or just making sure that they had a roof over their head or clothes on their back. And those things were never lost on my siblings and I growing up because of what my parents endured. Um,
Mm,
so I felt that pressure, right? I
yeah.
felt the pressure of being a few or an only in certain kinds of
Mhm,
rooms.
mhm,
Um, and the need to ensure that I was successful or that I succeed, or anytime people entrusted anything with me, it's like just this deep, never ending sense of responsibility.
mm,
And the way that that articulated itself as pressure,
yeah.
and the way that that went from being a really strong noble motivator to a strong factor in my crumbling,
Mm.
the
Yeah.
distortion of that. And then there were just sort of childhood traumas that became present for me that I had kind of blocked out or moved away from memory that began to unearth, and I started to recognize that this was all of what was driving me. This was all of
Mm.
what was in my motivation, and all of what was in my ambition was about trying to settle some score or trying to prove
Right.
something or trying to be worthy or trying to be respectable or trying to
Mm.
be protected and safe,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until I took this all back to the stud
Mm.
that I really could even see what was operating to begin to try to heal and reconcile and make really conscious choices and decisions about what I wanted to continue to be motivated by and what I wanted my work ethic to be shaped by and what ways I wanted to transform and reimagine the way I work.
Yeah. So how did you do that? I mean, how did you do that? Because, this resonates so much with me, so much. And I can't even begin to say all the ways that it resonates. And only maybe in the last 3 years have I awakened to why I work the way I work. And the thing is, when you're a high performer, you're just praised for being a high performer. It's very rare that you step back and think, well, is it actually good for me to be this kind of high performer? Or is there another way to shift into high performance without masochism or without doing it from a place of from a trauma response, a place of trauma response, and that I really could not wake up to that until I also had kind of a real disruptive time in my life where I had to reevaluate. And so I this resonates so much. So how did you recalibrate? How did you heal?
Yeah. I think the first thing that I had to really understand was how I had developed certain coping mechanisms to address the challenges I felt,
Mm.
and that was everything from what were my coping mechanisms for dealing with my family's expectation?
Mhm.
What were my coping mechanisms for dealing with being in places where I didn't feel as welcome for whatever
Mhm.
reason, right?
Yeah.
Where I didn't feel as knowledgeable or as connected, and these are conversations, Tria, that I believe go on for every single one of us. No
Yeah.
matter what people sort of perceive on the outside, there is an internal discourse that many of us are in
Mm.
that has us not believe that we're successful.
Mm. Yeah.
And there's not a lot of interrogating into, well, why is it
Mhm.
that no
Mm.
matter how much we achieve or how much we get or how much we own or how much we're quote unquote worth
Mm.
in the dollars and cents conversation,
Mm.
that we still don't feel like we've arrived anywhere,
Yeah.
or we still feel that there's more to get, or there's more to go be, or there's more to, you know what I mean? And we don't
Yeah.
question it. And I
Mhm.
think the beginning of starting to heal and transform it was to start to question it
Mm.
and to question how much of what I had inherited in the terms of the stories and the narratives about who I was and how it is, what work's supposed to be, until I started to question, is that really what I believe? Or is that really even serving me? Forget whether or not I believe it. Is it doing me good or is it doing me harm?
Yeah. Yes.
I had no room to even begin to consider any form of new terms and conditions. And so I spent a lot of time becoming painfully aware of
Mm.
just how dysfunctional it was. Mm. Back to back all nighters, not eating, not sleeping, or sleeping very little. And again, I know I'm so not alone in this, but
Yeah.
this was the unspoken reality. You do whatever you need to do and you put a face on it. And you're in the meeting the next day or you're wherever you need to be. And so much of our narrative about resilience, unfortunately, gets hooked into stepping over things that we actually need not step over.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
We've sort of created this culture where we don't deal with things until things deal with us.
Mm. Mhm. Yep. Say it.
And it's that part that I had to reckon with because there was a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah.
Um, physical. So there were physical ailments happening that I was working through. There were relationship collateral damage, both within my family as well as within colleagues and coworkers and my team. And I had to really confront how I got here
Yeah.
to better understand how to sort of break it apart
Yeah.
and then determine, like, okay, what do I want to keep
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what do I want to release?
Yeah. I think that's so powerful. I think it's one of the things I say the most is the phrase "make space" is constantly coming to me. I call myself a space maker even in the facilitation that I do with companies, because I think if we don't make space in our personal lives, in our work lives to question and deconstruct things, to make space, to pull things apart and maybe put some things back together, but maybe release other things that aren't serving us. I mean, when you're talking about there's so many stories, we are just a collection of stories. And when we don't examine those stories to know which ones actually serve us, or and which ones are making us better and stronger and which ones are depleting us, when we don't stop to think about those narratives and change them, which we have the power to do, we're we're living in we're not actually taking the reins of our life in a way that is empowering, not in a way that is necessarily, I think even when I say take the reins of life, I'm hesitant because I also know there's so much pressure associated with that, and I also believe there's something to just being
Yeah.
and witnessing the life that's happening, but I do think so much that those there are so many narratives that are not just, and I think you were kinda saying this a little, or at least I was hearing this. There's the narratives that you have from yourself, your own experience, your family experience, and there's also these collective narratives that we get wrapped up in, and regardless of them having truths, like these things did happen, and this might and the collective interpretation of that thing is this, but if that collective interpretation actually keeps me not being able to cultivate safety in myself or not being able to rise above something that I don't want to keep me down, then I have to read that narrative. And I hope people listening can follow along with that. But I hope it doesn't sound too esoteric. But
Yeah.
I think so much about how we get caught in the stories of ourselves and of others. And if we don't take the space, if we don't make the space to examine them, it can bring us to our knees.
Huge, huge. You know, in the book, I described this process of like renegotiation and reconciliation in kind of three stages, right? It's the first is like the reclaiming.
Yeah.
And it begins with to your point, the stories, the
Mhm,
narratives.
mhm.
What narratives are serving me? What narratives are not serving me? What narratives have I inherited as part of my own familial or cultural lineage? Because there's a familial lineage,
Yeah,
then there's a cultural lineage, then there's the societal lineage.
yeah,
It's exactly what we're saying, right? There's layers and layers of agreement
yeah,
that we've bought into. And this opportunity to really look at what stories still serve me versus what stories don't.
Yeah.
The second piece of realigning is about my values
Mhm.
and about my truth.
Mm.
And where am I operating or moving in ways that feel aligned with my values? And where am I operating or moving in ways that challenge what I believe? Or
Mm.
where am I being in truth and where am I not?
Yeah.
And I will say that for me was one of the hardest
Mm.
because I had to confront every place where I was pretending,
Mm.
every place where I was putting a face on it or putting up a show or telling somebody what they wanted to hear as opposed to what it really was, or telling myself what I wanted to hear as opposed to what
Ah,
it really was. Like, because you know, it
yeah.
always, I just want to say, you all, it always starts with you and you, no matter what we think
Yes. Yes.
about the out there. It's always us and us at the heart of it.
Mhm.
And it wasn't, until I really could do that, that then it was about reimagining,
Mm.
which was like, okay, how do I want to see this newly? How do I
Yeah.
want to operate newly? How do I want to show up newly? What do I want to focus on that may be different than what I focused on or measured or valued even
Mm.
before? Um,
Mhm.
and so it was through those, like each of those sort of stages or phases of work that I was able to get to a place of really like, okay, this is what I want to take with me. Okay, this is what I want to value, what I want to live, what I want to operate in service to. And
Yeah.
then this is what I want to create.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what did that look like? How did you emerge? And, what's happened since?
So the first reclaiming part was really making peace with my dad
Mm.
and the ways in which the idolization of who he was and his legacy both supported and strengthened me, but where I felt it challenged me. And not like his fault, but
Yeah.
just what I had taken on, what I
Mm.
had interpreted, what I had taken in, and recognizing that there was a way to honor his legacy that didn't require me killing myself,
Mm.
or that didn't require me taking on perceptions about the world that kept me in a hostile
Mm.
standoff.
Mm. That's
Um,
powerful. Yeah.
and for me, it was very, very, very real. And so that process took work and support. And then in the like realigning work, it was recognizing just how much I held back out of fear
Mm.
that people wouldn't want to collaborate with me or work with me or be
Mm.
my friend, or you know what I mean? You will, and I say these things and I know on some level they sound so like basic. Um, but I also feel like they're so human.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when I dig to the bottom of this with so many other leaders and people that we have the privilege of working with the crowd, like it's in there, right? It's, if I tell you what I really think, if I tell you how I really feel, if I honor that my gut is saying left, even though everybody else is trying to talk me into right.
Mm.
And there were tons and tons and tons and tons of places where that was showing up or where I was making somebody else's challenges my business,
Mm. Mhm.
So a lot of codependency and being able to really connect to and understand what was at the heart of that work. And, shout out Melody Beattie for her incredible body of work around
Mm.
codependency, and helping us be able to understand these behaviors in a really tangible way.
Yeah.
But other people's approval, other people's saviors, other people's problem solvers, other, on and on and on
Yeah.
and on and on, and all to the detriment of my own integrity.
Mm.
Um, so it was doing that work, and that was like relationships by relationship by relationships.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then the reimagining, which is the heart of where I am now, and a sacred practice, and what I invite, and the folks that we have the honor and privilege to work with is really get what do you really want?
Yeah.
Independent of anybody's opinion,
Mhm.
independent of anybody else's standards,
Mhm.
independent of anybody else's should. What
Yep.
do you really want? And what would it look like to create the space to have it?
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Well, your work just continues to blossom, and you're so prolific in, I'm so excited for your new book. And when are pre-orders for the new book?
You can order it now.
That's right. You can
It'll
order
be
it now.
available. Yes, it'll be available in May
Oh my
2025.
goodness.
You can order it
Well,
now.
Intentional Ambition is coming out in May, and I am so excited to read it. And I can just like, again, listening to you talk, you talk so beautifully. Every word counts. And it's like, it just feels so good to hear you talk. So I can't wait to read. And, I'm curious, obviously, we do similar work in some ways, but I always like to think about how these personal stories at this intersection of work and life, what is the advice we can give to business leaders about how to create cultures that learn from you? Like, what is something that a culture could learn from you from this story you shared? What's something a business leader could use to strengthen their culture in some way?
I think one of the first things that I'll say is that your gut work,
Mm,
meaning that often when we are going astray
mm,
from our values, our principles, uh, what we know makes sense in our spirit. I want to speak it from this perspective.
mhm,
Um, we feel those inner nudging.
mhm.
We know when we've hit a guardrail or a guard post. And we also know that for so many of us, it isn't always in these sort of dramatic ways. It's sort of like we veer a little to the right one day, and then the next day we veer a little bit more to the right. And, it's a slow creep, is the way I describe it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then one day we wake up and try to reconcile how we've gotten so far off course.
Mm,
But I start with your gut works because I think we're in a moment where we're being invited into a level of cognitive dissonance that if we buy in, we may find down the road and not too far down the road is going to be very hard to reconcile.
yeah.
And we have been conditioned. This is where I was talking about the stepping over. We've been conditioned to step over our feelings. We've
Mm,
been conditioned to step over our hesitations and our reservations. Um, And listen, there are times when it's appropriate. It's a growth opportunity to move past our reservations and hesitations because there is a new experience available that is rooted in our growing of capacity.
mm,
But there are also times when we know danger's on the cliff
yeah.
and we act like we don't know danger's on the cliff and we keep marching anyway. And we sort of go, well, somebody's bound to blow the whistle or somebody's going to raise the flag or it just doesn't
Mhm,
have to be me.
yeah. Mhm,
Right? Or why do I have to be the one? Because we feel the very, real or perceived repercussion of what that is. But I do want to say that as a leader, our intuition is everything. It matters. It is
yeah.
what gives us the guidance and the nuanced direction that also enables us to take great care of our teams
Mm,
and to
mhm,
be really valuable stewards to an organization, even sometimes when we're challenging the
yeah.
organization to grow in a particular way. And I think one of the things that organizations have to grapple with is that challenge sometimes can be good.
Mm,
So if we create a culture of simple conformity, that conformity is the only option, that there's a way that we rob ourselves of the intelligence and the brilliance of our people.
Absolutely.
and we rob the mission
Yep.
from the opportunity to grow.
Yep.
And so, this honoring of our instinct, honoring of our innate sensitivity, honoring of those inner awareness, those inner rumblings that often provide valuable information,
Mm.
especially when it's connected to the way we're working.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
the mission, we may evaluate the mission and say the mission is right,
Mm.
but the way we choose to get there and the context and the culture that we create, are we enabling every soul that contributes to the mission to thrive? Are we
Yeah.
enabling spaces for everyone to prosper? And so I talk a lot about this zero sum context, which I think we are in the throes of,
Mm.
and it is screaming to be transformed
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
our system, our work, right? This idea that a win for one means a loss for the other. This
Mm.
idea where we only believe that through antagonism that we really get the best, or this
Mm.
idea of just urgency for urgency's sake, to the point where people are so overwhelmed that they
Yeah.
cannot even digest what we're communicating.
Yeah.
They can't even take it in because the tidal wave and the level of inundation is so extreme.
Yeah.
And so I think as leaders, we have to start to really discern what a definition of a healthy environment is for us,
Mhm.
what a
Yeah.
healthy team is for us,
Mhm.
what a healthy work relationship is for us.
Yep.
What is the true sweet spot of work life integration
Mhm.
that enables us to bring excellence and mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, right? Personally,
Yeah.
financially thrive. And to believe that the two can coexist, that we're not in a scarcity conversation
Mhm.
about people or profit. We're not in a scarcity conversation about accomplishment or productivity and time. We're not, you feel like there's all
Yeah,
these frontiers.
absolutely. 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 I'm reading a book actually that was suggested to me by Fran Hauser, who was in the season 1 of the episode or season 1 of the podcast called The Soul of Money. And it's
Yes,
really yes, it's
yes.
really changing the way I'm thinking about so many things beyond just money. And what you're saying right now, that scarcity mindset that she talks about with money, which people can like intellectually see that right away. But the way she positions it has really made me think about our scarcity mentality with everything in life and how we our scarcity mentality is related to money, it's related to our time, it's related to our what we have, what we don't have. It permeating everything. And when we can step back and think, what if I have everything I need?
Yeah.
Including what you said at the very beginning, like, what if my gut is everything I need and it will tell me everything I need to know if I just listen to it, if I just develop a relationship with the I like to think of the gut as the highest form of myself and as the oldest form of myself, the most knowledgeable, the wisest part of myself. What if we made space to listen to that inner being, that gut? And so I think what you're saying is just so powerful in business because for business leaders to hear is that, you know, what and you and I have actually had some conversation around this when we've talked about AI, but to me, this is a real time in human history where our technology is allowing us to be our most human self. And so what we are having to reckon with, which I think is a very beautiful thing, is to really say, well, what does it really mean to be human? Not to be an operator or a doer or someone whose value is only defined by what they contribute in by their actions, but what does it mean to show up as a whole human, creative, intuitive, thoughtful? I think of humans as being, I've been I feel like you and I could probably have a long conversation about this, but I've been really thinking about being the fact that I feel like I am a channel of everything that's come before me. And even in the earlier part of this conversation, part of my job as the channel is to know, okay, what's for me in this life to channel and work through, and what's for me to shed and release.
Yeah.
But to to me, there's something beautiful about re-examining what it really means to be human and how to bring that into the workplace, and to be able to level up, because not because we're rushing through the human process, but we're actually being human beings.
Yeah.
And when you think about every single product that you've ever bought, every single ad you've ever loved, it's because it meets a deep human need. And that's what we need to be returning to, is how are we meeting the deep human needs? And the only way to meet the deep human need is to know who we are as a human, and to then let that actualize, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I I'm so curious, people listening, if they I I feel like you and me are just like in like this same wavelength. I'll be very curious to hear
Yeah.
how other people respond to this conversation, but I just think you're so wise, and I think I'm so excited for your next book. I'm so excited for the world to hear more from you, and I'm so grateful for this conversation, and I'd love to do some rapid fire questions with you if you wouldn't mind that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, here we go. Fill in the blank. Growth is.
Essential.
Yes. What was the very first thing you realized you were good at as a child?
I think feeling the
Mm,
ability to read faces, people, situations, and circumstances
yeah,
through my emotional body, emotional intelligence.
yeah. That's both a really beautiful thing and a really hard thing, I think, as a child, to pick up all of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What was your very first job?
I sold shoes at a shoe boutique near my high school.
I love that. That's so great. Um, who was the best boss you've ever had?
My only, excuse me, really sort of 9 to 5 professional job was in corporate, interestingly enough, working in the chemical industry.
Mm,
And, uh, and his name was Anthony. First name was Anthony. Last name Destasio. Was a phenomenal boss.
mm, love that. What's something you're trying to learn right now?
How to be even more obedient to what I'm hearing.
Mm, that's good. That's good. What's something you're trying to unlearn?
How to become less preoccupied with others' definition
Mm,
of what matters
mm,
when
mm,
it doesn't, for me, resonate as true. For me.
mm. Yes, that's good. Tell me a book or a movie that changed your life. I know you probably have 7,000 books that you would tell me.
There are so many. One of the books that I carry with me, and I have like a whole sort of stack of books, but one of the books that I'm carrying with me a lot is the Tao Te Ching.
Mm.
And all of 2024, I was in a deep study of verse 30 of the Tao
Mm,
Te Ching. And it says, that in our governing of man or governing of people, that violence is never the answer, that violence, even when well intentioned, always returns on itself, comes back. And that the master does his work and then stops, or does her work and then,
mm,
um,
mm,
that the universe is forever in chaos.
mm.
And that trying to manage events goes against the Tao,
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
right? Because she believes in herself. There is
Mm,
nothing to prove because she is content with herself.
mm,
There is nothing to do because she accepts herself. The whole world accepts her.
mm. It's beautiful, powerful. I love that. When growth feels hard, actually, first one. When growth feels good, how do you celebrate?
I take a moment and really acknowledge that I'm growing, like I can see progress. And I really do stop. And I will tell you that maybe even 5 years ago was not the case.
Mm,
Um, but I stop now and I really acknowledge, like, you're moving in the direction you want to be moving, and see, and I say to myself, see your progress. I
yes.
think it's such an important motivator to keep going.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like on this podcast, it's about 50% of folks will say, wow, I just don't celebrate enough. And so I love that, you're saying that you acknowledge it now, but also that you didn't always acknowledge it. And so, yeah, I think that's so important. When growth feels hard, how do you take care of yourself?
I pace myself. I find compassion, like a reverence for the challenge.
Mm,
And I want to say that this was one of the things that really got me through, was bowing to those deep-seated wounds, those
mm,
deep-seated challenges, those deeply ingrained habits that maybe had served me to a point but no longer serve.
mm.
And just having compassion for the level of depth,
Yeah.
and hence the level of practice to
Yeah.
transform, to heal, to reform, feels really important as a practice when it gets
Yeah.
hard.
Oh my goodness. I think that's so just also the image of bowing to the wounds, then the reverence, you use the word reverence. I think there's so much power in that. And again, you can't do that unless you make space to do that. But I think that is ex- really making space for the acknowledgement, for the embracing and the healing of that part of those parts of yourself, I think is just so life changing. What would your 8-year-old self say about the life you're living now?
She has been speaking loud and clear these days. Really play more. And I wanna name this because I think this was one of the biggest things that really opened up for me through writing the book and having all of the conversations that supported the writing of the book, ours included,
Yeah.
um, is that life is meant to be joyful,
Mm,
that happiness and fulfillment are meant to be a part of our work.
yes.
And so much of us think that that's a luxury,
Mm,
that, oh, well, if you're happy, that's the bonus.
mm,
Oh, if you're fulfilled, oh, that's the bonus.
mm.
And how much it has taken to really embrace and embody and own that belief and make decisions, disciplined decisions
Yeah.
connected to that belief,
Yeah.
to come out of base level survival.
Mm. Oh, I think that's so powerful, and I would love to talk to you more about it at another time because that's another in this concept of being a channel, I keep thinking of my ancestors, and I keep thinking that I keep feeling like they want me to have joy. Like they want me to like we've gotten to this point in human history where we know so much of what's going on, and it can be so chaotic and so heartbreaking and so many things, and yet I can sense that we have the ability to have more joy than humans have ever had. And if we don't make space for that, then we're missing it. And so I
100%.
feel that so much. Last question is, when you grow all the way up and you leave this life, what is it that you will congratulate yourself on?
Doing everything that I could to find and honor and maintain liberation in the
Mm,
way that spirit or source intended.
yeah.
Um, I think about, where we are in this beautiful moment of the potential of AI,
Mhm,
and what I wish most for us, as leaders, as family members, as human beings, is that we held equal reverence for our humanity that we
mm,
hold for technology. We get the wonder and the awe of technology in ways that can be really beautiful when it's applied with love and with reverence and with care.
mhm,
And we have the opportunity to be in the same level of awe and wonder of humanity and our humanity
mhm,
when we are applied with love, with reverence, and with care.
mhm. Yeah. Ugh, this has just been such a beautiful conversation, Ra. You are one of a kind, and I'm so happy our friend Britt Barron introduced us. She is amazing, and I knew would introduce me to only amazing people, and you are by far just one of the most amazing. So thank you for your heart, for your wisdom, for your courage to show up as fully yourself and to grow your way through this life. I'm so grateful to know you and to share space with you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. And shout out, Britt. We love you.
Yes, we do. We love you. We love you. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.